talk about the passage that talks about we will judge angels. I'm putting this under fallen angels for a reason, because I think there's kind of a reference to that. This could just as easily go under the next section, which you just had a little short preview of, difficult questions. I said last week, it was last week, that we were going to go next into the angel of the Lord, a discussion of that. But I'm actually going to put that off and do the difficult questions first, because it ties in with some of what we're talking about here with the fallen angels. This is one of those that could kind of go either way, but it's a reference to 1 Corinthians 6, 2 and 3, where he says, "Do you not know that saints shall judge the world? And if the world shall be judged by you, are ye unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Know ye not that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life?" James Burton Kaufman, he took the position that this was sarcasm. Here's how he would paraphrase that little text. "You who know all about judging angels in the last day, how about judging some of these petty disputes that you're disgracefully airing in the courts of the pagans?" That's how he would paraphrase it. That's a possibility. Paul sometimes uses irony, bordering on sarcasm, if not outright sarcasm, with the Corinthian brethren, because they were so puffed up with knowledge. They thought they were spiritual know-it-alls in many ways, and so he sometimes is pretty frank with them. But there's a passage in Revelation 2 that talks about, it doesn't come outright and say judging, but it's clearly implied, and that is not in a context of sarcasm. Let me get over there and I'll read you the exact wording. This is in the context of the letters to the 7 churches of Asia. But he says there in Revelation 2:26 beginning, "He that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations," power, exousia, sometimes translated authority, over the nations, "and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father, and I will give him the morning star." So the idea there of judging, reigning, authority, that's clearly not in the context of sarcasm. So I don't know that is the best way to reconcile this. We do know it's not talking about we'll judge angels in the sense of deciding their eternal destiny. God's not going to, on the day of judgment, say, "Chad, here are a group of angels," or even the collective church, "Here's a group of angels. I want you to judge them and determine are they going to be lost or saved." We understand that's all given to God. But it may be in the sense of the church approving, church being Christians, of course, approving or endorsing the judgment of Jesus himself. That may be what it's referring to. May mean using faithful Christians as character witnesses against lost men and lost angels. That may also be what is indicated. I think there's a quote here from T.R. Appleberry in his studies in 1 Corinthians that I think sums it up best. He says, "The conduct of saints is regularly expected to judge by comparison the conduct of the world. The church is God's means of demonstrating to the angels that rebelled against his authority that some men will serve him out of their love for him. The church is made up of those who deliberately choose to do God's will and refuse to do the bidding of Satan. If men can do this, angels certainly could have done so. The character and conduct of the saints then becomes a means of judging the angels that sinned." I think that's a pretty good take on that passage as far as I can tell. So it's certainly not an easy passage. I think Kaufman's suggestion might be right as well, but in my opinion, I think that's the best one. Go ahead.
I brought this up before, but Hebrews chapter 11, starting verse 1, puts a lot of emphasis on that we are doing things by faith. We've not seen it, but it's we're moving on faith. And then he takes the rest of the chapter pretty much to say, let me paint examples of people that did what God said, not seeing God. And yet, in the context, that seems to make sense to me. That, listen, we're going to be viewed much different than angels in heaven if we were found faithful, because we didn't get to see what they got to see.
Right. And that'd go right with this. Here we are acting by faith. It's not a blind faith, certainly, as we've seen in our weekend seminar, but at the same time, we're not directly in the presence of God in that literal sense. And Paul even talks about that. Faith that is seen is not faith. Hope that is seen is not hope. What we have right there, you don't hope for, it's there. And so, yeah, the angels, they're there. They're in the presence of God. And I also think, as we mentioned before, that probably has something to do with why there's no plan of salvation for the angels. I think that would certainly stand to reason. But I really like the way this guy put that. I thought that was very, very good, how he worded this about what it means that we will judge angels. And I certainly think that's the case, and what Tim said goes right with that. All right, let's talk about the church at war with Satan and his angels. The devil and his angels form a well-organized, a highly intelligent, a worldwide army, but it is also, of course, a spiritual army. And it is, it's also rather elusive. You can't say he's here or he's there and this is where we go to fight him in this particular location. Sometimes he's very, very sneaky. Comes to you in things that seem very good. Sometimes people even... People use this jokingly many times, but there's nothing funny about it. Sometimes people will use that expression, how can it be wrong if it feels so right? And that's the devil's MO, is to make things feel good, seem really good, fun, without seeing the big picture. And so that's what we mean when we say it's a very elusive army. But they're no match for Christians who are outfitted in the armor of God. We know this from other scriptures. God's angels are also providentially involved in this fight. A key word there being providentially. They're not miraculously involved in this, but they are ministering spirits. We've already talked about that. I won't rehash that. Scriptures also indicate that not all fallen angels are imprisoned in Tartarus. We talked about that. Won't go over all those scriptures. But, Satan himself, we've concluded he's an angel, a fallen angel, but he's not in Tartarus. We know, or we don't know rather, why some are and some aren't. As far as why are some imprisoned in Tartarus, why are some not? We're just not told that. And so anything I could say on that, it would just be speculation. We do know that Satan is limited in power, and it may be that imprisoning him and some of his fallen angels, that maybe that's a part of the limitation of his power. Why is Satan free now? We talked about this one in our Q&A a few weeks ago. It may be because God, in essence, says to humanity, if you want him so bad, I'll give him to you. I don't know. Again, that's kind of a speculation, but it would certainly make sense. But you can just think of all the suffering that Satan has visited upon all of humanity throughout all of time since the garden because of the foolish choices of mankind. Not because man didn't have a choice in it, but because they made foolish choices and said, essentially, I want Satan. I choose not to have God. I want the alternative. And as unthinkable as that may be at times, it certainly does happen. And sometimes it happens very blatantly. Sometimes it's people who are deluded, and they come around later on and say, you know what, I made a terrible mistake, and I want to make that right. So, but there is a war going on, a spiritual warfare with Satan and his angels. They're well organized, they're very intelligent, and you need not think they're not, because the devil is highly intelligent. They are worldwide. You can go to another country, you can go to a remote, desolate island. The devil and his forces are there and they're active. But it is a spiritual army, and they're very sneaky. Switch gears just a little bit. Let's talk about first century demons. Travis Quatermass in his book does not cover this, but it has come up, and so I wanted to cover it. I did some research. Some of this comes from studying under Brother Cates in school, which, his research probably goes back to a common source with me as well, because I have a book by Brother Rex Turner Sr., who taught Brother Cates many, many years ago. And so in many ways, probably drawing off the same source there. But Brother Turner has a book called Biblical Theology, and he covers a lot of different topics in that: anthropology, theology, angelology. And then under angelology is a study of the fallen angels. Actually, I think he may even have it as a separate chapter on demonology, But it's all these different ologies, study of, and one of them is this, and he had some very good material, and so I'm drawing on that, I guess, predominantly, but some of the material from Brother Cates as well. But this came up a few weeks ago, talking about first century demons. There are three basic views when it comes to demons, as you read about them in the New Testament, especially during the lifetime of Jesus and shortly thereafter, once the church comes into existence. Some people say there's no such thing as these demons. This is just the New Testament using accommodative language for a superstitious belief. It's just an illness. Some people would say illness in general. Some people say what it is, it's people who were crazy. They had mental problems, and so they are referred to as having a demon, but they didn't have a demon, as we would think about demon possession. They had some mental problems. Without getting into all that very in depth, suffice it to say there are about at least 80 references to demon possession in the New Testament. 11 of those, I've just got a couple of them listed up there, but 11 of those clearly distinguish it from physical illness. I'm just going to grab one of them here just to make this point. Go to the book of Matthew. I'll read, just go to chapter 8. I'll grab that second one. Matthew 8:16, where it says there, when the evening was come, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils. And this is often translated demons. So when I say demons, devils, however you want to translate that, the American Standard 1901 translates it demons, and I think that's probably to distinguish between the being that we designate as the devil or Satan. And so as to avoid confusion, you have demons. But they brought to him people that were possessed with demons, and he cast out the spirits with his word and healed all that were sick. Very clear differentiation there between those who were sick and those who were possessed by demons. I'm close enough to chapter 4, verse 24. I'll mention that. They brought unto him sick people that were taken with diverse diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with devils, and those which were lunatic, and those that had the palsy, and he healed them. So again, clear differentiation between physical illness, even lunatic, maybe some mental illness, and being possessed by a demon. So we know that's not right. The second view that people take about first century demons are that demons and Satan, including Satan in other words, are not of God's order of creation. They're just simply something that we just can't say. The Bible just doesn't give us information about them. Well, that's not going to fly, because Nehemiah 9:6 is very clear. God is sovereign. He is all-powerful, omnipotent, and He is over everything and created everything. Again, this brings in dualism, and you got a real problem if you start saying that Satan and his demons could somehow rival the power of God. That is not a biblical idea. You've got to throw out your Bible if you're going to go that route. And you've got to throw out all the evidence that supports the Bible as being right. You've got to ignore a lot of things to take that position. It just doesn't hold. That text is very clear. God is sovereign. He is the one who's omnipotent. So they've got to be created beings. We went through this talking about the origin of Satan as well. Third view, demons, like Satan, they belong to God's order of creation, and they've been assigned ultimately to hell for their disobedience, for some kind of rebellion. Again, this is the only logical choice, but there is, again, some variety of thought among those who would even subscribe to this view. And so we're going to look at some Bible information about demons, and then we'll talk about what is probably the most logical, likely explanation for demon possession in the first century. And of course, what is the million-dollar question that we have to answer before we move on? But that's what everybody wants to know. Is there demon possession today? Can people still be possessed by demons? This, of course, was made popular a few years ago. I guess it's been several years, by the movie The Exorcist. Yeah, it was all about demon possession. Some Bible information about demons, first of all. Turn to Mark chapter 1. And if I move quickly and you're not quite there and I start reading, just bear with me because I want to make sure I get through this at least before we run out of time tonight. So I may just get there and start reading. They went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority, and not as the scribes. There was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. When the unclean spirit had torn him and cried with a loud voice, he came out of him, and they were all amazed, insomuch that they questioned among themselves, saying, What thing is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority commandeth he even the unclean spirits, and they do obey him. You may want to hold your spot there. I'm going to go ahead and go over to another passage, Matthew chapter 12. And I will read 42 through 45. Then we'll make some observations here. Jesus again speaking here, The queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, a greater than Solomon is here. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he saith, I will return into my house from whence I came out. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept, and garnished. Then goeth he and taketh with himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself. And they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be also unto this wicked generation. If you want to get to the next passage, you can go ahead and turn over to Matthew chapter 8. But I hope you held your spot there in Mark, because we'll come back to that as well. But before we move on from this, I'll make some observations. I'm trying to mark my spot so I don't have to keep turning. There we go. Notice some things here. Demons are intelligent. They possessed advanced knowledge that Jesus of Nazareth was the Holy One of God. This is in the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, but he comes on the scene with where these demons are, and what do they say immediately? I know who you are. You're Jesus of Nazareth. You're the Holy One of God. Hey, there are a lot of people at this time, might even argue very few on the earth who knew that. They jumped on that very quickly, and they said, we know who you are. So they have advanced knowledge. They're intelligent. They are set for punishment. Are you come to punish us before the time? To torment us before the time? So they knew they were destined for punishment. They're also under Jesus' power, authority. He says, hold your peace and come out of him, and they don't say, I don't think so. They can't resist. They're under his authority. They're under his power, his control. Going to Matthew 12, we learn here that it would seem, and we'll notice in a moment, this is not necessarily the case, but perhaps they avoid water. They pass through dry or waterless places. Not necessarily a literal reference to a dry place, but they are continually seeking habitation in a human body. Here's this spirit. He goes out and he wanders around, and he says, what? I'm going back. He's seeking a body, a dwelling place, right? And so we learn that about demons from this passage. We also learn that they sought out other demons to dwell with them. What does he say when he finds that place empty? Hey, I'm going to go get some friends, and we'll all come and dwell inside of this human being. So that's just a few more things we learn about them. Now let's go, we'll look at some passages in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I won't read all these. I tell you what, I don't know which account I want to read. I'm over in Matthew. I'll just read Matthew's account. These are all parallel accounts in the different gospel accounts. Each writer, sometimes one writer gives more details than the other. And in fact, you'll notice, I'll go ahead and pull this up right now and mention this. 2 demon-possessed men. But one of them is so notorious that Mark and Luke concentrate on him with no mention of the other one. They're focusing on the one demoniac or the one demon-possessed man. I think based on that, I'm going to go to Mark's account. Let me do that. Sorry. I was trying to decide which one I want to read. I wish I had more time. I'd just read them all, but I'm just afraid we won't. Basically, I'm starting in verse 1. I won't read all this. Sometimes I'll just kind of summarize. He comes into the country of the Gadarenes. He gets out of the ship. And immediately, verse 2 says, there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. Always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice and said, what have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the demons, devils, King James, besought him, saying, send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000 and were choked or drowned in the sea. So a few more things we learn from this passage about demons. The demon-possessed men, and particularly this one we read about here in Mark chapter 5, they had superhuman strength. They bound him with chains, and he could break the chains. Superhuman strength. They were also very fierce and vicious. By the way, you see this attested to again in Acts chapter 19, verses 13 through 16. You see this because here are these vagabond Jews, and they're going and they find this man who's possessed by a demon, and they say, what? Oh, I adjure you by Jesus whom Paul preaches to come out of this man. Well, they understood, they figured out they were counterfeits, but they'd figured out that when this man Paul was going around and he was saying, in the name of Jesus Christ you're healed, in the name of Jesus Christ come out of the man, it was working. And so he says, hey, apparently it's all in the name. It's all in what you say. You know, my dad used to say sometimes when I'd try to do something and I couldn't get it, and then he'd come and it just worked right, he'd say, you didn't hold your mouth right. So maybe they thought if they just said the right thing, hold their mouth right, this would work. But what happened in that context is the demon says what? I know Jesus, and I know Paul, but Brother Kate said, I'll never forget it, he was teaching Acts at Forest Hill, and he says, who are you? And that man in whom those demons had been dwelling, he leaped upon them, and he attacked them. As Brother Kate said, he whooped them good. And they went out of the house fleeing, naked and afraid. So they were very vicious. Demon-possessed men also, we learn from this passage, they dwelt among the tombs, seemingly indicating that they have some kind of an affinity for mortal tenements, graveyards, tombs, sepulchres, that kind of thing. All this is important. We'll notice why in just a moment, but these are just observations for right now. Demons also recognized and addressed Jesus as the Son of God. Again, they knew who he was. And in this occasion, in Mark's account, they come worshiping before him, bowing, doing obeisance. It wouldn't be worship in the sense that they're just, they want to serve him as their Lord and Savior. It wouldn't be in that sense. But they bow before him, again indicating his authority. They ask the question, have you come here to torment us? Again, it shows they're under sentence, punishment that is yet, at this time, yet to be inflicted. We also learn from this that a legion of demons possessed one man. It wasn't just one. Of course, we also learned that from Matthew 12, if you recall. They entreat Jesus not to send them to the abyss. They say, don't send us to the abyss. To go in do not disturb mode here. Phone keeps buzzing. Don't send us into the abyss, they beg. They chose to go into swine rather than to be cast into the abyss. So they asked for that, but when they possessed the swine, the pigs, they ran off into the sea and thus were drowned. So again, just some basic information there, and we'll pull all this together here in just a moment. Okay.
When possessed, the swine ran off into the sea and drowned. The swine were drowned. Demons aren't drowned when they
Yes, thank you. I don't want to leave that ambiguous. Yes, the swine, the pigs drowned, not the demons.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
One of the differences I noticed here, they were called devils and demons, and here are evil spirits. Is anything in that name as far as connected with the demons and devils? Why here is it called evil spirits? I wonder.
I don't know. I don't know that there's, I can't think of anything. They're certainly not good in the context where, Jesus mentions a demon or a devil, certainly not being referred to as a good one. So I don't know. It may be a difference, maybe one of those where the Holy Spirit's using a particular vocabulary of a writer. I've not ever compared Matthew, Mark, and Luke to see if one uses one term exclusively or the other.
I wondered if that was the Holy Spirit or the different ones in the gospel.
But yeah, I mean, definitely every time you see them possessing someone, it's never a good spirit.
Right.
So I don't think whether it says demon, devil, or evil spirit, I definitely don't think there's any significant difference to be noted. Just different terminology. All right, looking at some views on demons. Were you the only one? I think I heard a couple of people at the same time, but I think I got everybody right. Okay. Looking at views on demons, what were the demons? That's what sometimes people ask. Who are they? How do you explain these demons that they're inhabiting people in the first century? Here's a view. It's not my view, by the way. If you saw that bullet and you're going, where is Chad going with this? This is not my view. This is some people's view, that demons were departed spirits of some kind of a mongrel angelic human race that came from intermarriage of angels and humans. Now, if you go all the way back to Genesis 6, and this is why I'm going to go ahead and do difficult questions next after we finish this. It clearly is not going to be tonight, but because that's one of our difficult questions about angels is who are those folks in Genesis chapter 6. Just reading very quickly what the text says in those first 4 verses. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth that daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. There's nothing there about angels and humans intermarrying or intermingling. But what makes people say that?
Let's say the sons of God married the daughters of men, making it like there's a special group of something considered the sons of God.
Because early in the book of Job, that's where people are getting at.
Proper understanding of the Bible, people that are righteous are the sons of God. So when the righteous marry the unrighteous, I believe that's exactly what it's talking about.
This, what people are doing is they go in the book of Job, early in the book of Job, chapter 1, chapter 2, when the sons of God came before the Lord. And it's a clear reference in Job 1 to angels. You cannot get around that. And so it's a fallacy, though, that they assume because it's angels there, it has to be angels everywhere else. And there's nothing in Genesis 6 to indicate that. But Tim's already touched on that. This theory is ridiculous, and it is completely without Bible support. We'll unpack that a little bit further when we get to the difficult questions section of our study. But just for right now, suffice it to say that sons of God can also be, as Tim's already pointed out, humans. To those who believed on the Son of God, Jesus, God gave them power, authority to become sons of God. You believe on Jesus. Now, sometimes in denominationalism, they teach that wrong. They say, you believe on Jesus, and there it is right there in John 1, 11 and 12. You'll be a son of God. No. That's not what the text says. He gave them power to become sons of God. That's authority. You cannot come to the Father except you have access. You cannot come before the Father. I cannot come before the Father. Why? Because sin separates. Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. But God sent a mediator. And he says, I'll be your advocate. Now you can come before. And so you believe in Jesus, he'll give you authority to become. You can obey the gospel and you can become a son or a daughter of God. But the point here is just to point out sons of God does not have to mean angels. Tim's hit it, and that's kind of getting ahead of going on into our question about that later on. But what this text is talking about is sons of God, righteous people, marrying daughters of men, those who are descendants of those who are not following God. And the key word there is at the end of verse 2. They took them wives of all which what? They chose. They didn't give God any say in the matter. They didn't consult what would God have us to do. They didn't think about that. They see these beautiful women and they say, just like Samson, he saw a beautiful woman and he says to his parents, I want her. Get her for me to marry. I want her for my wife. All right, another theory about demons, another view. Some people say they were evil spirits of some kind of a pre-Adamic creation. In other words, before Adam, before any human roamed the earth. This is, again, completely without Bible support. We could spend a lot more time on that, but just suffice it to say, there's no support for it in the Bible. This idea that there was a creation and it fell, and so God made the earth without form and void. In other words, before it had been inhabited and there was this pre-Adamic race. It just doesn't hold up. There's just no Bible support for that. Some people say demons were spirits of those who died in the flood. They mostly say this because of Matthew 12:43, but as I've already hinted at, waterless places may just mean a deserted or uninhabited place. It doesn't have to mean literally a dry place because demons can't stand water because they're all spirits who died in the flood. That just doesn't, you're jumping to some serious conclusions there if you take that position. Again, no real evidence for this theory. So there's one more view that I think is, well, two more views. One of them I think is a possibility. One of them I think is probably the position I would take. Some people say demons are fallen angels who joined Satan in his rebellion against God. That's a possibility. But what would you say jumps out, or maybe you can't think of anything, maybe you can. Does anybody think of anything that would jump out in your mind as kind of leaning against that theory?
Well, the fact that Satan is a divine. Looking at the statements that they join to it, that's against the nature of Satan, that he would be unified with anything. But that may not be where you're going with that.
Well, I think that certainly makes sense. Here's one thing that I thought about. We've already seen from Mark 5, they have an affinity for mortal tenements. Why does that fit with an angel? I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me for an angel. And I don't know. I don't want to assume too much from Mark chapter 5 because that may not mean necessarily that all of them do. But this guy was hanging out in the graveyard. That's where he wanted to be. That would make sense if there's something connected to humanity, but it doesn't make sense with angels because angels don't die. Another problem is that demons seem to desire, or maybe even we might be fair to say they need to inhabit a body, which would not hold true, of course, with angels. They don't have that desire, or that certainly don't have a need. The view that I think holds the most merit is that demons were the departed spirits of wicked men. They could be from any time period, but they're wicked people who are set for punishment in hell at the last day. There's a specific purpose why they are not there in the first century. It's not to give them a second chance. It is something that is happening far enough in advance of the coming of Christ that he's going to show his power. You think about Jesus comes along and here's a man with a withered hand and Jesus says, I will that you be made whole. Here's a man who can't walk and Jesus says, rise up and walk. That's amazing and that's a miracle and that certainly shows his power over the human body. On another occasion, there's a storm and it's blustering and the wind is blowing and it's frightening and Jesus says, peace, be still. And the storm just stops. And he's got power over nature. On another occasion, of course, he walks on water. On another occasion, he has a little bit of bread and fish and he starts handing out to the multitude and the bread just doesn't run out. And he just keeps going and going and going. And then everybody's full and they said, I can't eat anymore. And they take up baskets of leftovers. It shows his power over, again, over nature and food. On another occasion, they don't have any more grape juice at the wedding. And so what does Jesus do? He makes it from water. On another occasion, here's a man named Lazarus. Don't roll away the stone, Lord. It's been 4 days. It's going to smell terrible. There's decay. Jesus says, roll the stone back. Lazarus, come forth. How he can even raise people from the dead. But then he comes along, and here are these departed spirits that have taken possession of a human body. And he says, you know what? I got power over that too. And he says, hold your peace. Come out of the man. And they can't resist it. In a word, it happens. All of this showing his power, his authority, his deity. He's not only Lord over nature, over food, over death. He's even Lord over the entire spirit world. And of course, shown ultimately when he rises from the dead and ascends back into heaven, never ever to die again. All this is showing, it's evidence that Jesus is God in the flesh. I think that's the most reasonable view. And of course, people want to know, inevitably, is it possible that someone can be possessed by a demon today? Let's answer that. Again, strong inference is that they were permitted to escape the abyss prior to the coming of Jesus. This was, of course, in advance enough for men to be very aware of their presence. Jesus is going to show also the apostles with the power that Jesus gave to them, the authority that he gave to them, demonstrating miraculous power, miraculous authority over the entire spirit world. The strong inference also is that with the end of the miraculous age, the demons were confined to the abyss and can no longer possess anyone today. There's no cure for demon possession except what? It's a miracle, right? I mean, it's never something that they say, okay, what we need is can you go find some olive oil or can you find this or that? It's always a miracle. That is the only way to do it. And yet I think about passages like 1 Corinthians 10:13. God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able. I don't think there's any way you could argue for any kind of demon possession today based on something like that because it required a miracle. And so if that's the case, there's no possible cure today because no one is around who could perform a miracle. Jesus could perform miracles. He gave that power to the apostles when they were immersed in the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. And the only way it went forward from there was an apostle had to lay hands on you. We learned that in Acts chapter 8. If an apostle doesn't lay hands on someone, they can't do miracles. And so what do you think happens when the last apostle dies and the last person on whom an apostle has laid hands dies? No more miracles. We don't need them. Why? They were for a very specific purpose. They were confirming Jesus is God in the flesh, or they are confirming the message is from God. We have the message now. It's been written down. It's been confirmed. We don't need miracles. We have a more sure word of prophecy. We talked about that a little bit Sunday morning in our Bible class with Brad. So, can demons possess people today? There's no possible way you could scripturally argue that such could happen today without God placing some kind of a burden for which there would be no possible escape for all of humanity. I wish we had more time. We could cover that passage on Genesis 6, but we'll save that for next time. That'll be our, Lord willing, our study next Wednesday night. We'll talk about difficult questions about angels, and I believe we might even, who knows, if it depends on what kind of time we make, we might even be able to get into talking a little bit about the angel of the Lord. But we got a few questions, difficult questions we want to discuss, try to answer concerning angels. That concludes our section on the fallen angels. A lot that we don't know about that. We don't want to get too far into the realm of speculation, but the Bible does teach us some things about this. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We'll pick up there, Lord willing, next Wednesday night.